She didn't know his name. She didn't know his net worth. She didn't even know if she would eat tomorrow. But she handed him her credit card anyway, and that single unremarkable moment in a crowded supermarket would quietly dismantle the empire of a man who believed that generosity was a disease only the foolish caught. But we are getting ahead of ourselves, because before we talk about what Chioma Obi gave, we need to talk about what she had. And the answer, by every measurable standard the world uses to counter life, was almost nothing. Welcome to Wealthra Stories, where every tale reveals the truth about human character, wealth, and the power of kindness. If you love stories that teach powerful life lessons, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notification bell so you never miss an upload. But before we get into what really happened in that supermarket, I want you to honestly answer one question. Do you believe the true measure of a person is what they have, or what they give when they have almost nothing? Drop your honest answer in the comment section right now. And then stay with me through every moment of this story, because by the time it ends, you will not just have an answer. You will feel it. Maplewood was not the kind of town that appeared on maps people actually wanted to read. It was the kind of place that existed in the margins, sandwiched between ambition and resignation, between what people hoped their lives would become and what Monday morning kept insisting they already were. The streets were honest in the way that tired things are honest. No pretense, no glitter, and just concrete that had seen too many years and too little maintenance. Market stalls that opened before the sun had finished deciding whether to rise, and the particular kind of noise a community makes when it is working very hard just to stay in place. This was Maplewood, and in Maplewood everyone knew everyone, which meant everyone knew everything, which meant that privacy was not something you owned. It was something you quietly grieved, and everyone in Maplewood knew Chioma Obi. They knew her the way you know a fixture, the way you know the bench at the end of the street or the tree that leans slightly toward the road but never quite falls. She was simply there, present, reliable. Chioma was 31 years old, and she taught English at Greenfield Community Grammar School, which was the kind of institution that sounded respectable when you said it out loud and revealed its true nature the moment you walked through the gate. The classrooms had not been painted since the last decade had a different digit in front of it. The ceiling fans moved air with the exhausted reluctance of men who had long since given up on the idea that effort produced results. Chalk dust hung permanently in the atmosphere like a fog that had nowhere better to be, and the windows, the ones that still had glass, offered views of a courtyard that had decided against ambition sometime around 2009 and had not reconsidered since. The teachers' salaries at Greenfield arrived the way some relatives arrive at funerals. Late, without apology, and somehow making everything worse by showing up at all. There were months when the money came in halves. There were months when it did not come at all. There were months so bad that the teachers had developed a private language for managing the silence in their bank accounts. A set of coded phrases and knowing looks that meant, "We are surviving again. Hold on, maybe next week." Chioma was fluent in this language. She had been speaking it for years. Her shoes had a hole in the left sole. This is the detail you need to hold on to, because it is going to matter, not because it is tragic, though it is, and not because it is unusual in Maplewood, because it isn't. What makes Chioma's left shoe significant is not the hole itself. It is what she did about it. Every Monday morning, without ceremony, without complaint, and without pausing to wonder whether this was a reasonable way for a woman with a university degree and 7 years of teaching experience to begin her week, Chioma cut a fresh piece of cardboard, shaped it carefully to the interior of her shoe, pressed it into place, and walked out into the world on a sole reinforced by the back of a cereal box. She did this quietly. She did this alone, and then she went to school and taught other people's children how to construct sentences that carried meaning, how to find the precise word for a feeling, how to use language like a tool rather than a decoration. She was brilliant at her job. Everyone agreed on that, even the people who agreed on very little else. But here is the thing about Chioma Obi that Maplewood could not decide whether to admire or resent, and whether to hold up as inspiration or quietly use as a cautionary tale to tell their daughters at night. Chioma gave. She gave consistently, generously, and with a completeness that suggested she had not received the memo about scarcity. When a student arrived at school without lunch, and in Greenfield, this happened with the regularity of weather, Chioma did not look away. She did not offer a sympathetic expression and return to her lesson plan. She quietly divided her own food into 2 portions and placed one in front of the child without making it a moment, without turning it into a lesson about gratitude, without doing what human beings so often do when they help someone, which is make the help feel slightly worse than the original problem. She simply gave half a meal every time, as though it cost her nothing, even when it cost her lunch. When a colleague at Greenfield needed transport fare home, and again in a school where salaries arrived like apologetic strangers, this was not rare. Chioma's hand was already moving toward her bag before the request had finished forming in the air. She gave transport fare. She gave time. She gave the specific and undervalued currency of attention, the kind where you actually listen to what a person is saying, rather than preparing what you will say next. She lent money she could not afford to lend. She covered absences, took on extra marking, stayed late to help students who were struggling with examinations that would shape the narrow corridor of options their lives were being funneled through. The community had a name for this. They called her the hunger manager. And they did not mean it as a compliment. The name had a blade in it. The suggestion that Chioma's relationship with her own needs was managed so poorly that she had essentially outsourced her survival to God and coincidence while spending whatever she actually had on everyone else. The name was meant to sting. Chioma wore it like it was embroidery. Her neighbor Margaret was the most direct of all of them. Margaret was the kind of woman who delivered hard truths the way some people delivered newspapers, efficiently, without particular malice, and with absolutely no concern for whether you were ready to receive them. She lived 2 doors down from Chioma in the narrow row of houses that lined Ebuka Street. And she had watched Chioma's pattern of giving with the attentive concern of someone observing a car rolling slowly toward a wall. One evening, the kind of evening that only exists in West African towns in the dry season, the air thick with heat that had nowhere to go, the smell of jollof rice drifting from someone's kitchen 3 houses down, the sound of generators beginning their nightly protest against the darkness, Margaret stopped Chioma at the gate. She looked at her with an expression that was somewhere between pity and exasperation, the particular look of a woman who had decided that silence was no longer a responsible option. "Chioma," she said, "you will die poor helping people who will not remember you." It was not a cruel thing to say. It was, by every observable metric, a reasonable thing to say. Margaret had watched this woman give away food and money and time for years. She had watched the colleagues collect their borrowed transport fares and offer nothing in return. She had watched students graduate and move forward without looking back at the teacher who had quietly made space for them at her own table. Margaret had done the arithmetic that Chioma refused to do, and the numbers were not kind. So she said it plainly, the way you say a thing when you have decided that love requires honesty rather than comfort. Chioma looked at her for a moment, and then she smiled. Not the smile of someone who is not understood, not the smile of someone performing peace they do not feel, the smile of someone who has considered this question carefully and arrived, long ago, at an answer they find genuinely satisfying. "I don't help people so they'll remember me," she said quietly. "I help them so I can remember myself." Margaret stared at her. The generator 3 houses down kicked into its rhythm. Somewhere, the jollof rice continued happening, and Chioma went inside. Now. 300 miles away from Maplewood, in a city that had fully committed to the vertical ambitions that towns like Maplewood could only dream about, there was a penthouse on the 42nd floor of a building that understood exactly what it was worth and had arranged itself accordingly. Floor-to-ceiling glass. The city below spread out like a diagram of human aspiration. All those lit windows, all those people working towards something, all of it visible and arranged and somehow abstract when you were looking down at it from this height. The furniture in this penthouse was the kind that required a specific vocabulary to describe. Not expensive, but curated. Not fancy, but considered. Everything in its precise place. Everything selected. Everything deliberate. This was the home of Damien Mensah, 34 years old. Founder and chief executive of Mensah Capital Group, which was the kind of company whose exact operations most people could not have explained, but whose results were impossible to argue with. Damien had built his first investment vehicle at 26, using a combination of inherited contacts, borrowed confidence, and a ferocious appetite for information that his competitors consistently underestimated. By 29, he was the kind of man that financial publications photographed against industrial backdrops to suggest depth of character. By 32, he had ceased to find any of it interesting. By 34, he sat in his penthouse on a Tuesday night with his dead father's journal open across his knees and a question in his chest that none of his acquisitions had managed to answer. The journal was old. The edges of the pages had softened with handling, the ink of his father's handwriting pressed into the paper with the particular firmness of a man who wrote as though the act itself were a contract. Emmanuel Mensah had been a self-made man in the fullest and most complicated sense of that phrase. A man who had constructed himself from shortage and difficulty and the specific fuel that comes from having been told, early and often, that people like him did not arrive at certain places. He had arrived anyway. And the cost of that arrival, which he had paid in full and without discounting, had shaped his philosophy in ways that could not be undone. Damien had grown up inside that philosophy the way you grow up inside a climate. So completely surrounding that it does not feel like a perspective. It feels like weather. It feels like fact. His father's words ran through the journal with the consistency of a doctrine. The poor are poor because they lack character. They will take from you and offer nothing in return. Never trust a person without money. They are, by definition, without virtue. The world divides itself along these lines, and the wise man learns to read them. Wealth is evidence. Poverty is confession. Damien had built empires on this belief. He had made hiring decisions based on it, investment decisions, personal decisions. And he had maintained a precise and managed distance from anyone who could not demonstrate the specific kind of competence that his father had defined as the only kind that mattered. And it had worked. By every quantifiable measure, the philosophy had produced exactly what it promised: success, accumulation, power, distance. But there was this hollow thing. It had started small, barely a sensation, more like an absence than a presence. A room in his chest where something should have been and wasn't. He noticed it first at a company celebration, surrounded by people who genuinely admired what he had built, holding a glass of something that cost more than most people's grocery budgets, and feeling, with a clarity that was almost physical, that none of it was filling whatever the hollow thing was. He noticed it again at a board meeting, at a gala, at a private dinner with people whose net worths combined to a number that required scientific notation. The hollow thing was consistent. It did not respond to achievement. It did not respond to acquisition. It simply continued, quiet and persistent, like a frequency just below the range of hearing that you feel in your back teeth. So Damien Mensah, who had built a career on testing hypotheses with data, decided to test a hypothesis with data. The hypothesis was his father's. The world divides between the virtuous and the poor, and they are, essentially, the same division. Damien had lived exclusively in one half. He had built walls between himself and the other half that were architectural in their precision. He had never, as an adult, existed in a space where people did not already know who he was. And it occurred to him, sitting with the journal and the hollow thing in his chest, that there was something profoundly unscientific about a man who claimed to understand the world from a perspective he had never actually occupied. He would run the experiment properly. He would live as a poor man for 7 days. He designed it with the attention to detail of someone who had made a career of designing systems that did not fail. Second-hand clothes sourced from a market 3 cities away. Nothing identifiable, nothing branded, nothing that whispered money to people who knew how to listen for it. A prepaid card loaded with $40, enough to create real choices and real constraints, not enough to solve any problem larger than a meal. No security detail, no driver, no phone with a number that anyone in his life could reach him on. A fake name. A room in a boarding house in a neighborhood that his usual world did not overlap with. He told no one. He left detailed instructions with his executive assistant to be opened only if he had not made contact after 10 days. And then he walked out of his penthouse and into a city that did not know his name. The first 6 days were a study in confirmation. Day 1. A bus queue. He arrived at the back in good time, standing with the particular patience of someone who has decided that waiting is a neutral activity. A man in a pressed shirt, clearly not poor, clearly someone who had decided that his time was more valuable than the time of the people already in the queue, simply stepped in front of him. No eye contact, no acknowledgement. The silent statement of someone who had correctly identified that Damien, in his current form, I was unlikely to push back. Damien did not push back, he documented it. Day 2, a landlord. He had identified a room that was advertised on a handwritten notice at a general store. 2,000 a month, available immediately, no security deposit. He knocked. The landlord opened the door, took in Damien's appearance with the rapid computational efficiency of someone who had been making these assessments their entire life, and told him the room had been taken. The notice was still in the window of the general store the following morning. Damien documented it. Day 3, a waiting room at a public health clinic. He sat down in the only available seat, which happened to be next to a woman with a large handbag. The woman's hand moved to her bag immediately, not dramatically, not even consciously, the way a reflex operates below the level of decision. She held it closer to her body. She did not look at him. Damien looked at the wall and documented it. Day 4, Day 5, Day 6, variations on the same data. He was invisible in shops unless he was suspected of theft, in which case he was extremely visible. He was last to be served and first to be watched. Doors did not open for him the way doors had always opened for him. Conversations did not begin. People moved through him like he was furniture arranged inconveniently. He was, by every social and interpersonal measure, not quite real. Not quite a full person, a reduced thing, a background element. His father's journal was being proved correct with a thoroughness that should have been satisfying. It was not satisfying. It was something else, something adjacent to anger, but deeper, something that had been named poorly by the languages available to him. Day 7 arrived on a Thursday. It was the final day of the experiment, and Damien had already begun, in the private space of his own mind, to compose the conclusions. The data was consistent. The hypothesis was confirmed. The world his father had described was real and legible and operated exactly as advertised. He would return to his penthouse. He would write his findings. He would perhaps put them in a drawer. He was not entirely sure what he intended to do with a 7-day experiment that had confirmed that the world was exactly as brutal as he had always believed. But he was confident that confirmation itself had value. He was confident that knowing was better than not knowing. Even when what you knew was a thing that made you want to sit very still in a room for a long time. He walked into Greenfield's supermarket at 11:30 in the morning. It was the kind of supermarket that had made peace with its limitations. The shelves were not fully stocked, but were organized with a dignity that suggested someone cared, even if resources did not cooperate. The fluorescent lighting had one tube that flickered with the irregular rhythm of something about to fail. There was music playing from somewhere, the kind of music that plays in supermarkets not because anyone chose it, but because silence felt like a statement. Damien moved through the aisles with the careful economy of someone who had spent 6 days learning how to make $40 behave like 80. He selected what he needed. He was precise. He carried his basket to the register and began placing items on the belt. The cashier was a young man with the face of someone who was 3 hours from the end of a long shift and measuring each remaining minute with clinical attention. He scanned the items with efficiency. The total appeared on the small screen. Damien presented his prepaid card. The machine considered it. The machine declined it. The silence that followed was only a second long, but it was the kind of second that expands. Damien felt it press against his chest. He tried the card again, the second swipe, the hope that perhaps it was a technical failure, a connectivity issue, something solvable by repetition. The machine was not interested in being cooperative. The decline was firm, final. And the word appeared on the screen in the particular font that registers use when they want to communicate bad news without employing a human to do it. The cashier's lips did something that was not quite a smirk, but was close enough that the difference was technical. The man directly behind Damien in the queue made a sound, Not a word, just a breath with opinions in it. A sigh that managed to communicate that his time was being disrespected by someone who had no business wasting it. Another man further back said something in a low voice to the person next to him. Damien did not hear the words, but understood the shape of them. A small crowd had gathered in the way that small crowds always gather around difficulty. Not organized, not intentional, just the particular gravity that human discomfort generates, pulling observers toward it. Every face was wearing a version of the same expression, the specific arrangement of features that says, "You do not belong here. You have confused this space with a space that would accommodate you. You should have known better than to arrive unprepared into a world that requires preparation." Damien's jaw tightened. He recognized this moment. He had been documenting moments like this for 6 days. He knew exactly what it was, and exactly what it meant, and exactly what column in his findings it belonged to. This was the data point. This was the confirmation that sealed everything. This was the world revealing itself, one more time, as exactly what his father had always said it was. He was already composing the sentence in his mind, the way he would write this particular moment into his notes, either precise and clinical language he would use to contain it, when something happened that he had not included in any of his projections. A hand appeared beside him, small, brown, steady, holding a credit card. "Please," said a voice, "use mine." He turned. She was wearing a faded blue dress, the kind of blue that had begun as something more vivid and had been washed into its current, quieter form over many cycles and many years. Her hair was pulled back simply. She was not wearing anything expensive. She was not performing anything. She was standing beside him at the register of a supermarket with her credit card extended toward the cashier, and her eyes, this is the part that Damien would not be able to explain later when he tried to write it down. Her eyes were carrying a tiredness that she had absolutely refused to put on her face. The tiredness was real and deep and had clearly been accumulated over a long time. But her expression was something else, calm, steady, undemanding. "It's okay," she said softly, as though she were reassuring someone who had stumbled in a corridor and needed to know that no one significant had noticed. "We all have hard days." She did not ask his name. She did not calculate whether he deserved the help. She did not look around to see who was watching. She presented the card to the cashier with the simplicity of someone completing a task, a small, unremarkable task. And the transaction was processed. His groceries were paid. His dignity, which had been standing precariously at the edge of the moment, was quietly retrieved. She picked up her own small basket, the one she had been carrying when she arrived, and walked toward the back of the store. That was it. That was the entirety of what she did. Damien stood at the exit and could not move. Something was happening in his chest that he did not have accurate language for. The hollow thing was still there, but it had changed in character. Or rather, something had moved in him, some tectonic shift in the arrangement of things he believed, and the hollow thing was responding to it. He was not supposed to feel this. This was not in the experiment. This was not a column he had created. His father's journal, which he had carried in his mind for 34 years, like a field guide to human nature, had no page for this. No entry, no footnote, no asterisked exception for a woman in a faded blue dress who gave without arithmetic, without strategy, without expectation, without even waiting to see what her generosity had produced. Something cracked open in him. Not loudly, not dramatically, the way light enters a room, not through explosion, but through a slowly opened door, gradual, quiet, and completely transforming the quality of the air. He found her in the back of the store. She looked up at him with the mild, uncomplicated expression of someone who had already completed the relevant transaction and had moved on to the next item in her day. He tried to give her the money back, reached into his pocket and held it toward her. She shook her head. A small, firm movement. "No." He tried again. She shook her head again, with the particular certainty of someone who had not given in order to receive. He pressed the money into her hand, physically placed it there, and she looked at him with an expression that was somewhere between patience and amusement. And then Damien Mensah, who had given speeches in boardrooms and keynotes at conferences attended by thousands of people, who had negotiated billion-dollar agreements across polished tables, who had built his entire adult life on the performance of confident articulation, said the only thing he could find. "You restored something in me I didn't know was missing." She looked at him, blinked, nodded slowly, the way you nod at something that you do not fully understand, but that seems to mean something significant to the person saying it. She placed the money in her bag, not because she was satisfied with receiving it, but because continuing to refuse would have cost him more than accepting it would cost her. And she was, at her core, a woman who understood the weight of other people's needs. She picked up her basket. She thanked him quietly. She moved toward the next aisle. Damien walked out of Greenfield Supermarket into the Thursday afternoon light and stood on the pavement and breathed. Somewhere across the city, Chioma Obi walked home through Maplewood in her faded blue dress, her left shoe pressing against the familiar softness of fresh cardboard. She prepared her lesson for the next morning. She ate a smaller dinner than she would have preferred. She thought briefly about the man at the supermarket, the tightness in his jaw, the look in his eyes, the strange intensity of his gratitude for something she had not considered particularly remarkable. She thought about it the way you think about a brief, unusual weather event. With interest, briefly, and then it passed. She did not know his name. She did not know the name of the company whose logo appeared on half the buildings in the financial district of a city 300 miles away. She did not know that the $40 on a prepaid card was a costume, that the second-hand clothes were a research tool, that the man whose dignity she had quietly restored at a supermarket register was sitting right now in a car that his driver had brought to the edge of the neighborhood, staring at his father's journal with the expression of a man whose entire map of the world has just been redrawn. She knew only what she always knew, that someone had needed something, and she had been there. That was the whole calculation. That was the only arithmetic she ran. She patched her shoe, she prepared tomorrow's lesson, she slept. And 300 miles away, in a car moving through a city that bore his name on its buildings, Damien sat with a journal that had been the operating manual of his life, and began for the first time to wonder whether the man who wrote it had understood anything at all. The experiment was supposed to confirm a thesis. It had done something else entirely, and the woman who had done it, the woman in the blue dress with the cardboard in her shoe, who had extended a credit card to a stranger without hesitation, without calculation, without any expectation of what might come next, had no idea, or she was already asleep. She was already dreaming of tomorrow's lesson. She had no idea that what came next would arrive like weather changes, invisible in its approach, unmistakable in its arrival. She had no idea that the hollow thing in a billionaire's chest, the thing that 7 days of poverty and 6 days of confirmed cynicism had not touched, had been cracked open in 40 seconds by a woman who simply decided that a stranger deserved not to stand at a register and feel like less than a person. So here is what I need you to sit with tonight. There is a woman in your life, maybe many women, maybe you know her well, maybe she is you, who gives from empty, who splits the last portion without performance, who shows up not because the world has been kind to her, but because she has decided, deliberately and at significant personal cost, that kindness is who she is rather than what she gets. The world calls her a fool. The world says she will die poor. The world has been running its arithmetic on her for years, and the numbers keep coming back unfavorable. But what if the world's arithmetic is simply wrong? What if the woman in the broken shoes, the woman who reaches into her empty pocket for someone she has never met, is not the one who has miscalculated? What if it is everyone watching her who has the wrong formula? And what if somewhere, right now, someone who has been watching, someone who has the power to quietly and completely change the geography of a life, has just seen something they cannot unsee, and something that has cracked open a door in their chest that was sealed shut with inherited philosophy and managed distance and the comfortable certainty that people without money are people without virtue? What would that change? What could a single, unremarkable act of grace, 40 seconds at a supermarket register, 1 credit card, no audience, no expectation, what could that actually set in motion? Stay with me, because Chioma has no idea what is coming, and neither yet does Damien. But the universe? The universe has already written the address, and the universe, as it turns out, has a very reliable delivery system. It just runs on its own schedule. Damien had spent 34 years building walls. Precise, architectural, undeliberate walls, the kind that do not announce themselves as walls, but present themselves as standards, as principles, as the reasonable boundaries of a man who understands the world clearly and has organized his life accordingly. He had built them from his father's words and his own ambitions, and 6 days of confirmed data, and they had held perfectly and without compromise against every test the world had thrown at them. It took a woman in a faded blue dress exactly 40 seconds to walk through all of them without even trying. He stood at the exit of Greenfield Supermarket and could not move. This is the detail that matters, not that he was surprised, though he was. Not that he was moved, though he was that too, in a way he did not yet have accurate language for. What matters is that Damien Mensah, a man who had not stood still involuntarily since he was a child, a man whose entire adult architecture was built on the principle of forward motion. This man was rooted to the spot outside a supermarket, holding a bag of groceries that a stranger had paid for, completely unable to determine what his next move was. His father's journal had no page for this. That was the thought that arrived first, and it arrived with the particular force of something that has been true for a long time, but has only just been spoken aloud inside the mind. 34 years of poverty is confession. 34 years of never trust a person without money. 34 years of a philosophy that had functioned as a field guide to human nature, reliable and confirmed day after day by a world that seemed to have agreed to perform accordingly. And then one Thursday morning, one woman, one gesture, and suddenly the field guide had a chapter missing. Suddenly the map had a territory it had never accounted for. He found her in the back of the store. She was standing in the household goods aisle, examining 2 different brands of dish soap, with the careful attention of someone for whom the price difference was a real consideration. She had already moved on, completely and without residue, from what she had done at the register. She had not lingered to observe the impact of her generosity. She had simply done a thing and continued doing the next thing, and if Damien had not followed her, the moment would have existed only in his memory, unnamed and unacknowledged, like a transaction that never generated a receipt. He held out the money. She shook her head. A small, unhurried movement, the headshake of someone who has already internally closed the matter. He pressed the money toward her again. She shook her head again, and this time there was something in her expression that was almost amused, the particular look of a person who finds it faintly bewildering that a favor requires this much administrative follow-up. He stepped forward, took her hand gently, pressed the money into her palm, and closed her fingers around it with the quiet insistence of a man who has decided this is non-negotiable. She looked down at her closed hand. She looked up at him. And Damien, who had Gemeinsahaven speeches in boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar agreements across polished tables, this man found himself with almost nothing available in the way of language. Stripped of everything that money and power had given him, stripped to the raw material of a man undone by 40 seconds of unrequested grace, he had one sentence. He said, "You restored something in me I did not know was missing." She looked at him. The quality of her attention was extraordinary, not searching, not performing empathy, simply present. She nodded slowly, the nod of someone who does not fully understand the specific words, but recognizes the shape of what is being communicated. She placed the money in her bag. She turned back to the dish soap. He walked out of the store. Back at the penthouse, he went directly to his desk. His father's journal was where he had left it. He picked it up, carried it to the window, on and read the familiar passages with eyes that were no longer the eyes of a believer, and not yet the eyes of a man who knew what he believed instead. They were the eyes of someone standing precisely at the border between an inherited world and an earned one, with one foot still in the old country and one foot on ground that had no name yet. He put the journal down. He called Priya. Because what Damien did next was not reflection. It was not the kind of internal processing that the hollow thing in his chest deserved but had never received. What Damien did was what Damien always did when he had identified a problem that required solving. He moved, he organized, he brought the full weight of everything he had to bear on a situation with the precision of someone who understood that intention without action was just weather. present, unnotable, and completely without lasting effect. He told Priya what he needed: a woman, a teacher, Greenfield Community Grammar School, a town called Maplewood. He did not know her name. He knew she wore a blue dress and had cardboard in the sole of her left shoe and taught English and had eyes that carried exhaustion she refused to display. He needed her full name, her financial situation, and a complete picture of the institution she worked in. Its infrastructure, its funding history, its outstanding obligations to staff. Priya said she would handle it. Damien said quickly. She said, of course. The information arrived in 48 hours. Chioma Obi, 31 years old, 7 years at Greenfield. Outstanding by every local metric: examination results, student testimony, colleague feedback. Salary arrears of 14 months. I'm currently owed 3 months of back wages. Personal finances, minimal savings, monthly obligations that consumed her income entirely. No safety margin of any significance. The school itself occupied 3 pages of Priya's report, and none of those pages were comfortable reading. Infrastructure not meaningfully updated in over a decade. A roof in critical condition. Laboratories that existed as rooms with the word laboratory attached and nothing else. A library with shelves and not enough books to justify the shelves. And yet the examination results, and yet the student outcomes. The stubborn, inexplicable persistence of a standard of education that the building, the budget, and years of institutional neglect had done everything possible to prevent. Damien read the report twice. He turned to the section on Chioma's personal finances and read it a third time. He thought about the cardboard in the shoe. He thought about the credit card extended without hesitation in a supermarket where the balance, he now knew, was considerably thinner than the gesture had made it appear. He thought about "we all have hard days," spoken by a woman who had been having hard days for years, who had not allowed that fact to alter what she offered a stranger by a single degree. He called his legal team at 7 in the morning. He told them he needed to activate the Mensa Education Initiative. Full operational activation. Complete structural renovation of Greenfield Community Grammar School, not cosmetic, everything. Salary arrears for every teacher, cleared completely. An operational endowment to remove the school's dependency on irregular government funding. A library properly stocked. Laboratories made genuinely functional. All of it initiated within a timeline that reflected his urgency rather than the timeline institutional processes preferred. Then he paused. His legal team waited. He said, "There is a scholarship." He said it differently from how he had said the rest. Slower, more deliberate. The way a man speaks when he is saying something he has been composing in his mind for 2 days and wants to get exactly right. A scholarship established in perpetuity, funded generously, designated for students who demonstrated exceptional ability in English and the humanities. It would carry the name of the English teacher at Greenfield, Chioma Obi. Her name on every document, every award letter, every ceremony. Her name is the scholarship. Is that understood? His legal team said it was understood. He said, "Everything is anonymous. My name does not appear on anything. The initiative is a foundation, not a person." One lawyer asked, "The scholarship bears her name, but with no donor attribution. Is the client comfortable with that?" Damien said, "Her name is the attribution. Her name is the whole point." A brief silence. "Noted," the lawyer said. He ended the call, and now the tension in this story changes its nature entirely. Up to this point, it has been interior, the private geography of a man cracking open. But from this moment, the tension is architectural. It is the tension of 2 worlds being deliberately moved toward each other by forces that only one of the people involved is aware of. That asymmetry, the space between what Damien knows and what Chioma does not yet know is coming, is one of the most unbearable kinds of dramatic tension a story can carry. Subscribe to this channel if you are enjoying the story, because you cannot afford to miss what happens next. Think about it. Right now, as Damien's legal team builds the machinery of transformation, Chioma is in her classroom. She is teaching. She is splitting her lunch. She is shaping cardboard. She is doing exactly what she has always done, inside the same building with the same damaged roof, and she has absolutely no information, not a whisper, not an instinct, that suggests anything is about to change. 3 weeks during which architects were commissioned, contractors briefed, endowment vehicles structured and funded. 3 weeks during which a personal arrangement, separate from the institutional components, directed not at the school, but at Chioma herself, was handled with the discretion of people who understood that some transactions are not about money. A house in her name, solid, functional, dignified, and entirely hers. A car, a direct transfer sufficient to remove from her daily life the constant low-grade pressure of not having enough. Permanently. 3 weeks during which Chioma patched her shoe 5 times, split her lunch, stayed late with struggling students, and lived the same life she had always lived with complete unself-consciousness. She had no reason to believe this particular stretch of ordinary days was the last ordinary stretch she would ever have. And then a Tuesday arrived. A car appeared at Greenfield's gates that did not belong. It parked with the calm certainty of a vehicle that has reached the correct address and has no doubt about this. A man in a suit stepped out carrying a folder. He asked for the principal. He was directed inside with the slightly confused deference that Greenfield extended to anyone who arrived in a good car with a suit and a folder. Because these arrivals were rare enough that the institution had learned to treat them as significant until proven otherwise. Mr. Adeyemi received him. He listened. He opened the folder. And then this man, 11 years managing institutional decline, with the combination of bureaucratic resignation and genuine care that characterized people who stayed in broken systems out of love rather than ambition, read the documents and experienced the particular dislocation of a person whose understanding of their current situation has just been revised completely and without warning. He read everything twice. He asked about the scholarship. The lawyer confirmed it. The donor had specifically named her, Chioma Obi, in perpetuity. Mr. Adeyemi sat back. He thought about 7 years, the cardboard, the split lunches, the salary arrears she had absorbed without leaving, the examination results that should not have been possible. He thought about the transport fare he had borrowed and never returned and felt, briefly but acutely, the specific quality of shame that arrives when you understand the full magnitude of what a person has been carrying while you were only partially paying attention. He picked up the phone. He called Chioma's classroom. She came without rushing. She knocked. She entered. She sat down when he asked her to, responsive as always to the needs of the room before her own. He told her in portions, the renovation, the endowment, the salary arrears cleared, the library, the scholarship. He paused at the scholarship. He said her name. He said, "It bears your name, Chioma," permanently. Something shifted in the quality of her stillness. The lawyer slid an envelope across the desk. Personal. Separate. The donor wished to remain anonymous. She looked at the envelope for a long time. She picked it up and opened it. She read the page inside. She read the number, property deed, vehicle registration, liquid transfer confirmed. She looked up. Both men in the room saw for the first time what Chioma looked like when she finally put down the weight she had been carrying so long she had forgotten it was weight, and not just the ordinary density of being alive. It did not look like joy. Not immediately. It looked like something prior to joy, a structure held up by sheer will for years, finally given permission to rest. Something in her face softened in a way that confirmed to anyone paying attention that the steadiness she had always carried was not the absence of pain, but the disciplined management of it. She breathed. Once. Slowly. She folded the page, placed it back in the envelope, held the envelope in both hands. She asked who sent it. The lawyer said the donor wished to remain anonymous. She asked again, with the quiet directness of a woman who had spent her life asking for nothing and understood she was entitled in this moment to at least one answer. The lawyer said, "I am not at liberty to say. But the donor asked me to convey one thing, that someone once restored something in them they did not know was missing, and that this is their way of saying thank you." The room went very quiet. Chioma, sitting in a plastic chair in the administration block of a school whose name now carried her own name inside it, held an envelope in both hands and understood something. Not everything, but the outline of it, the shape, the specific phrase she had heard once for 40 seconds at a supermarket register 3 weeks ago, or spoken by a man whose jaw was tight and whose eyes held something she had filed away without a label and had just now, in this room, finally found the right word for. She said nothing. She thanked the lawyer. She thanked Mr. Adeyemi. She walked back down the corridor, opened her classroom door, and looked at 23 faces turned toward her. She felt something settle in her chest, like a stone finding the bottom of still water. Quiet, final, certain. She picked up the chalk. She turned to the board. She continued the lesson. And 300 miles away, Damien opened his father's journal to the blank pages at the back, the ones his father had left empty, certain the doctrine was complete. He picked up a pen and wrote slowly, with the deliberateness of a man who understands that some sentences are load-bearing walls in the architecture of a life. The measure of a person is not what they have. It is what they give when they have almost nothing. He closed the journal. He sat with it for a long time. Then he opened his laptop and began to write something he had never written before. Not a business plan, not an acquisition memo. Something that required him to be, without the armor of wealth or anonymity or institutional language, simply himself. Because she had stood at a register without any of those protections and changed the direction of his life, and the least he owed her was the same quality of exposure. He owed her his actual story, and he was going to have to tell it in person. But before he could cross those 300 miles, something was already moving in Maplewood. Something that would test Chioma's character in a way the cardboard and the split lunches never quite had, because those tests were about what you give when you have nothing. This new test was about something considerably more complicated. It was about what you feel when the people who watched you give and said nothing suddenly arrive at your door remembering, with extraordinary convenience, that they always believed in you. So sit with this question before the final moment of this story begins, and I want you to answer them in the comment section before you continue to watch the final moment. It is not a comfortable question, and it does not have a flattering answer if you examine it honestly. If the world suddenly decided to be generous to you, not because you changed, but simply because fortune arrived, could you receive the warmth of people who called you a fool without bitterness? Could you watch them manufacture proximity to your miracle and feel, genuinely, not contempt but compassion? Could you be, in the moment of your vindication, as gracious as you were in the years of your obscurity? Because that is exactly what Chioma was about to be asked to do, and her answer was going to be the final and most important thing this story had to say about what it truly means to give a stranger your credit card without arithmetic, without expectation, and without any idea that the universe has already written the address and is already, quietly and without announcement, on its way. Since the moment Chioma walked back into that classroom and picked up the chalk, the world had just rearranged itself completely in her favor. The universe had delivered in full with the unhurried certainty of something that was always coming and simply needed time to arrive. And now Maplewood, the same Maplewood that had called her the hunger manager, the same neighbors who had watched her patch cardboard into a shoe and shaken their heads, the same colleagues who had collected her transport fare and offered nothing in return. Now they were coming. All of them, with warm faces and reconstructed memories and the particular energy of people who want desperately to be standing close to a miracle they played no part in creating. The question is, what did she do with that? Margaret came first. She knocked on Chioma's door on Wednesday morning with the urgency of someone carrying news too large to hold alone, and her face arranged in an expression that was trying to be several things simultaneously, genuinely happy, slightly embarrassed, and working very hard not to show the embarrassment beneath the happiness. Chioma opened the door and let her in, and made tea and sat across from her and listened. She did not remind Margaret of "you will die poor helping people who will not remember you." She did not produce the sentence from storage and place it on the table between them like evidence. She simply sat and listened and offered tea and was kind. The same quality of kindness she had always offered, unaffected by the fact that the person receiving it had recently been certain she was a cautionary tale. Then the colleagues came. Then the neighbors. Then people Chioma barely recognized, as arriving with congratulations and carefully constructed warmth, suddenly remembering kindnesses they had intended to show and never quite delivered on. They came in a procession that lasted days, and Chioma received every single one of them with the same unhurried grace. No speeches, no bitterness, no public accounting of who had stood with her when standing with her cost something, and who had only arrived now that it cost nothing. She simply received them the way she had always given, completely, without arithmetic, without keeping score. And watching her do this, you understand something about Chioma that the cardboard and the split lunches had suggested, but this moment confirmed absolutely. Her generosity was never situational. It was never the product of circumstance or the performance of a woman who had decided that kindness was her brand. It was constitutional. It was simply, irreducibly, who she was. In scarcity and in abundance, in obscurity and in recognition, on the days the world was watching, and on the days, which were most days, when it was not. She bought herself a new pair of shoes. 300 miles away, Damien finally made the phone call he had been composing in his mind for 3 weeks. Not to his legal team, not to Priya. A personal call arranged through a channel that required some doing to the English teacher at Greenfield Community Grammar School, whose name was now attached to a scholarship and a classroom and a chapter of his life that had permanently rewritten everything that came before it. He did not lead with who he was, and he did not open with the net worth or the initiative or the architecture of what he had arranged. He opened with the supermarket. He said, "I was the man at the register." And then he told her the truth. The experiment, the journal, the 7 days, the 6 days of confirmed cynicism, and the one morning that dismantled all of it. He told her about his father. He told her about the hollow thing. He told her what 40 seconds of her ordinary character had done to 34 years of his inherited philosophy. She listened. She did not interrupt. When he finished, there was a silence that was not uncomfortable, but full. The silence of two people who have recognized each other across a significant distance and are taking a moment to absorb the fact of the recognition. And then Chioma said something that Damien would carry for the rest of his life, something simple and precise and entirely characteristic of a woman who had always understood that the most important things did not require elaborate language. She said, "I am glad you found what was missing, and I hope you keep it." That was all. That was enough. And the people who once called her the hunger manager watched in silence as Chioma's life rearranged itself into something none of them had the vocabulary to have predicted. The woman who patched cardboard into her shoe every Monday morning now owned the ground beneath her feet. A house in her name, a car parked outside it. A bank account with a number that made Margaret go quiet the one time she came close enough to know. A scholarship carrying her name being awarded to children she had once fed from her own plate. The colleagues who borrowed and forgot, the neighbors who warned, the community that calculated her foolishness for years, they all watched. And in the watching, every single one of them learned the only lesson this story was ever trying to teach. That the universe does not forget the address of a good heart. It simply takes its time finding the door. The universe, which had been doing its slow and reliable work across the full length of this story, closed the final distance between them, not with drama, but with the quiet completion of something that had always been heading toward its own resolution. Two people shaped by scarcity, one of money, one of mercy, had found each other at a supermarket register on a Thursday morning, and everything that followed had been the consequence of 40 seconds of grace offered without expectation by a woman in a faded blue dress to a man whose whole philosophy said she should not have bothered. She bothered. And the world, slow as always, answered. Now, before you move on with your day, I need you to do one thing. Not scroll past, not save this for later. Right now, think of the person in your life who gives from empty, the one who splits the last portion, who shows up without being asked, who carries more than their share without making it a performance. The one the world has probably called foolish at least once. Go and tell them today that you see them. Not because fortune is coming for them, though it may be, but because people who give without arithmetic deserve, at minimum, to be witnessed. Drop their name in the comments below and tell us one thing they have done that the world did not applaud. Let us applaud it here. And if this story moved something in you, like and share it, because somewhere out there is another Chioma patching her shoe this Monday morning who needs to know that the universe has never once lost an address. And if you have stayed with me to this point, that tells me something about you. It tells me you are the kind of person who stays, who listens all the way through, who does not leave before the story is finished. And those are exactly the kind of people I make these stories for. So thank you. Not the quick, automatic kind of thank you, the real kind. The kind that means I see you, I value you, and I will keep showing up with stories worthy of your time. Now go and be a Chioma to someone today, and I will see you in the next one.